We get the term mentor from Homer. In his Odyssey, it is a gift to provide his son Telemachus to mentor. And long story short, in this particular dynamic, mentor, it guides Telemachus through aspects of his life, but Athena is disguised as Telemachus. So there's something very fascinating about our term mentor. And in the ancient Greek pantheon, this idea of Athena speaking through mentor brings something of the sacred into the dance. And it's part of the topic of what we're going to explore today. My name is John Price. I'm the host of The Sacred Speaks, and welcome. Sacred Speaks is a podcast I've been hosting for the past 7 years, where each month I speak to leaders and teachers and mentors of my own. These are folks who've deeply influenced my spiritual and intellectual life. And in this month, I want to start something new, which is a solo episode. Each month I release 2 interviews. It's a new cadence, and I'm deeply excited to begin to have this kind of consistency on the show. And on top of the 2 interviews I'll be releasing, in my solo episodes, I'll be synthesizing and amplifying the material that comes up. And it just so happens that this month, or rather last month, I released 2 episodes, one with Father Richard Rohr and one with Dr. James Hollis. Each of these men are incredibly important mentors in my life. And so, of course, the subject matter, it seemed only natural for the subject matter to be mentorship and the masculine. So today we're going to explore that. At first, I'd like to say that Sacred Speaks has long been an altar for me, where each month I get to sit at the feet of these incredible people who've expanded my life in really profound ways. And so it's interesting and fitting that this first solo episode is going to be on mentorship and the masculine. I don't by any means mean gender when I say masculine or maleness. I'm talking more of an energy. And in fact, I kind of prefer to use the term yang. It has less baggage with it. But for the time being, we'll just use the term masculine, and you can understand what I mean. So if you're walking a path of transformation, and if you are stumbling into this podcast, I'm assuming that a lot of you who will be listening have been here for a long time. I'd like to invite you to my new website at Dr. John W. Price, DrJohnWPrice. A lot of John Prices out there. I had to have a couple of distinguishing factors. Check out the new website and sign up on the newsletter. I'll be releasing all kinds of new updates and events on what I will be releasing over certainly for the next few months. There's a lot that's going to be changing around here. I'll be hosting some webinars, retreats, new episodes, lots of updates. So go on there, sign up. You'll get the newsletter. You'll get updates. That's the way I'm going to be communicating most. Also, of course, check out the Instagram at The Sacred Speaks. I'll communicate mostly through that, but now I have a cadence of at least 3 touch points per month. So welcome. I'm honored and glad you're here. I'm excited to dig into this subject matter. As I said, today I'll explore the meaning of mentorship, how it's shown up in my own life, from early teachers to therapists and spiritual fathers like Richard Rohr and James Hollis. We'll be looking at how the masculine structure provides a path, and how mentorship can become a lineage, and how we are all called not only to be guided, but to become guides ourselves, guides of our own life, of our own creation, of our own vision. And at times, our own capacities to be guided can be taken over by larger structures. And so mentors, in a lot of ways, are those people who can reveal the gold within you. It's a fascinating term, and to highlight Homer's dynamic is important here. I, for one, when I started thinking about doing mentorship, I immediately thought about my early life in school, and the word had a kind of staleness. I did not know how to respond well to many of the mentors of my life because the arenas that they were seeking to teach didn't have a kind of juiciness or depth to it that I think I needed. And so as I was reflecting on this subject matter for today, one mentor stood out alone early on in life. Of course, as I go through this, I wonder what shows up in you. Every time I teach, I try to communicate staying both with the content that's being taught, but also looking inward. And so as we talk today, think through what might be stirring for you, what might be coming up. And you can certainly jot it down, take a note. But as I thought about mentors, I didn't like the term. I didn't like the idea, because upon reflection, I realized that most of my experiences of mentorship were very transactional. And not because the mentors made it transactional, it's because I wasn't in relationship to something sacred. Whether it's sports or teachers or any other figures, I didn't have a real connection to what was being taught. And so it was simply kind of surface level, except for music. This was something sacred, and it wasn't something that was mentorship as performance or grading, which is most of the mentorship that I had early on. It was mentorship as a portal. I started my early life wanting to play music when I was 5 or 6, and the guitar to me seemed like it was something radically other. And that's where we get the kind of dynamic between mentor and Athena, that there's something divine that's speaking through that process. And without a shadow of a doubt, for me, it was music most of my life. So today I'll talk a little bit about that. I'll try to challenge you to think about your own mentors in your life and where the sacred revealed itself in powerful ways. You can know when there's a kind of bliss or passion or enthusiasm, something deeper than the surface. So we'll talk about mentorship through 3 levels: the outer, the inner, and the living world. And in particular today, my outer mentors have been folks like Rohr and Hollis, also Jeffrey Kripal, who's been an important figure for me. And I'll talk about one of my therapists that was totally transformative. Then there are inner figures like ecstatic experience, dreams, visions, and then, of course, the living world, music, literature, for me becoming a father, and even the structure of marriage has been a powerful mentor process. Although, as I was thinking about mentors, one really came to mind in my adult life, who was my therapist. And of course, I became a therapist, so obviously it made a mark. Her name is Charlene, and one of the things that she taught me is how to inquire and express spirit, how to become inspirited. I've really cultivated my first deeper spiritual practice in her office. And along that time, I was also working with a Zen monk who would travel to the city where I lived and taught a Zen process. I learned to meditate and walk and meditate. He was trained in the lineage of Thich Nhat Hanh, so this was a pretty important material for somebody who didn't grow up in a contemplative tradition. Most of my early spiritual process had more to do with my social experience and less to do about any kind of contemplation. And so that was a pretty limited understanding of spirituality. It was through the psychotherapist's office that I first was mentored in a deeper way. She really guided me in my own dark night of the soul through a highly transformative time of my life where Humpty Dumpty fell off the wall and completely shattered. And so therapy became this powerful process where, oddly enough, my music identity, because in part music played such an important role throughout my whole life, I ended up becoming a professional musician and went on tour, and through that process had a lot of my collaborations through people who are helping support me in the process. But still, even upon becoming successful in music, it was revealed to me that it wasn't the pathway that I thought it would be. So through psychotherapy, through spirituality, I connected with that kind of deeper sacred dimension of life, and it opened up many portals and pathways for me, which has given me the energy really to hang in there. I mean, part of my own life, I got a master's degree and a doctorate in Jungian psychology, and have continued on that pathway for a very long time. And so my interest in depth and spirituality has been in large part guided by therapists and mentors over the past 20 years. And I think it's no coincidence that after about the age of 25, with a really powerful shattering trauma, I began to be really interested in deeper aspects of life. Because I think that is part of the process. In our culture, we don't have a lot of rites of passage or ritual or kind of ways to honor the necessary transitions where we shift from being oriented primarily to the outer world, which of course is what we do in our first half of life. We shift into being oriented to the inner world. And so that marker of that transition for me around the age of 25 was really quite powerful and opened up a new channel. And despite the fact that I'd wanted to be a professional musician my entire life, and that was my whole identity. The birth of my son really brought forth a shift in consciousness wherein I began to care for another being more than I cared for myself. And this radically altered, I think, in part an egoic way I was living. No shade on music whatsoever. It was one of the most important holding containers. And as an artist, it was deeply powerful. Although the shift into the inner life was something that I think our culture doesn't facilitate as much. And so just pausing for a second and thinking about meaningful moments in your life, meaningful, transformative guides. Who are the people that generated in you sufficient energy to feel supported as you navigated through complexity? And I'm not really talking about your profession, despite the fact that my profession is deeply spiritual. I'm talking about your vocation, a kind of deeper calling, and an opportunity to commune with, as Telemachus did, Mentor, who was representing an image of the divine. And on some level, that allegory is hinting at figures or experiences or beings in our life can be just that. A sunset can be just a sunset, or it could be something that's very powerful that opens us up. A marriage can be just a communion between two people that support each other, or it can be something profoundly other and set us up in a different territory. So to me, one of the reasons why I want to talk about James Hollis and Richard Rohr today is because not only has the podcast been a living altar for my own self-reflection. If you can imagine, I have around 118 conversations at this point. I have read close to that amount of books through this process. And I've said it on the podcast before. Initially, the idea for the podcast was created after I graduated with a doctorate and went into a small bit of depression. I'd been working for 12 years on my academic kind of training and pathway. And then to have that end, my psyche had no idea how to deal with that. I had been kind of informed, guided, challenged, pushed along the way, transformed in meaningful ways. And to not have that all of a sudden was destabilizing, to say the least. So I watched this documentary, The Defiant Ones, and on Dr. Dre and Jimmy Iovine and Interscope Records. I loved the way they were interviewing all the folks that were involved, and I thought, wow, I can do that. So I started the podcast. And unconscious of the fact that I was setting myself up to be consistently mentored by figures who are going to reveal elements of depth that for which I was totally unconscious at the time. I mean, I've talked to folks that are, Jungians and depth psychotherapists and scholars of religion and spirituality and quantum theory and language, and it goes on and on and on. And each of these moments, I was challenged to read the entire book that each of my participants had written and view the book in a really conscious way, because I wasn't just passively reading it. I was reading it to talk to the author. So that sets things up in a new way. And so the entire process has been mentorship. So I want to jump really quickly to Rohr and Hollis and talk about the nature of the masculine and this experience that we should all hopefully be blessed to have. Again, unfortunately, our culture isn't necessarily set up. We have all the setups in the world to be transactional. We don't have as much of an orientation to the sacred. So Rohr was pivotal for me in so many ways. He's very pastoral and has become a deep, beloved guide and friend. His book, The Wisdom Pattern, is a good example of mentorship from afar. The wisdom pattern, he goes through his order, disorder, reorder theory and talks about how we will inevitably experience these changes in life. He does so with wisdom. He does so with intentionality. And I have been deeply influenced by his thought. To this day, I think one of my favorite quotes ever is Rohr's, "What we don't transform, we transmit." And I'll say it again, what we don't transform, we transmit. And from a psychological perspective, it's such a deep gift that he has to reduce or no, that's not the right word, to provide really fast and simple, elegant phrases that reveal depth of complexity. If you just think about that phrase, what we don't transform, we transmit. Psychologically speaking, that's extremely important for us all to remember, is that the most potent elements of our own personal transformation begin on the inside. But we think, given the nature of our development, of our ego development, of our outer world preoccupation, we would think that transformation begins on the outside. And so we consistently set up a structure where we grasp for outer world elements to change. Think about money. I mean, that's one of the most powerful images. Any of us would be really hard-pressed to find somebody that doesn't imagine if they would just have enough money, life would change drastically for them. And on some way it's true. But if you get the money and then you don't do the inner work, life can be very stale. Look at Charles Dickens' book, A Christmas Carol. It's a perfect articulation of this dance. So Rohr for me has been a figure who is incredibly action-oriented and contemplation-oriented. So check out the Center for Action and Contemplation for more information on what they do over there. I love the title. It does perfectly what Rohr does. It says these are some of the most potent dynamics to create and maintain and incarnate a spiritual life. You know, one needs to be oriented to the inner world, to the world of contemplative process, and also action in the outer world. And if you'd become too oriented to one over the other, things are out of harmony. And so with Rohr's putting his money where his mouth is, so to speak, and that's an odd thing to say about a Franciscan. And so he's a reminder. He's been a reminder for me to pray to be humbled, pray to be reverent, work on the inner work as much as the outer work. Hollis, of course, is a different mentor figure. I started my doctoral program. Jim helped bring Saybrook University to the Jung Center of Houston, and they offered a doctoral program. And it just so happened he did it right at the time as I was graduating with my master's in clinical psychology. And so Hollis, for any of you who've read Hollis, certainly listen to the episode. I hope you have. I've interviewed him 3 times so far, and I've read, I'm fairly sure, all of his books. And I've never met more of a master of this material. Not only is he a master of the conceptual knowledge, he's one of the most exceptional writers and speakers I've ever met. So his book, Living on Borrowed Dust, really articulates most of his thought, his struggles. It opens up in new, powerful ways. I was really excited that he began to open himself up vulnerably, where he spoke about some meaningful inner world dimensions of his life. And he shows us a pathway of direction, and he consolidates information extremely well. It's dense, though if you walk that journey that Jim provides, you will be changed by reading one of his books. One of the books that immediately comes to mind is Under Saturn's Shadow, The 8 Secrets That All Men Carry. He was asked to provide a lecture on men, and he had thought about his clinical practice and all the secrets that men carry. It was very revelatory. I highly recommend it. One of the things that he did for me is he was on my dissertation committee, and he wouldn't tolerate me not living up to my full potential. He could see that because I fell asleep in a lot of classes early on, and any kind of categorical models. I mean, I totally rebelled against mathematics and English when I was younger. And so it was strange for me to want to go into the academic world. And when I ended up going into my doctoral program, I had to learn how to write for the first time. And of course, it was quite intimidating to be writing for Jim Hollis. And it was even more intimidating when I wrote one of my big papers and turned it into him. And he was like, nah, not yet. So I felt shame and conflict and like, what am I doing? I questioned my whole direction, and yet I hung with it. And through his process of mentorship, I started to change and shift. He held me to a higher standard, and he continues. And because our relationships like these mentors are so powerful, we carry them with us. So I'm convinced that the voice of Jim Hollis will be within me forever. Always kind of pushing on me and saying, not yet, keep going. And I'll fail again, and I'll keep going. I deeply thank both of these men for their role in my life and some of the ways that, Richard is this kind of, he's relational. There's a connection there. And I, being as deeply connected as we are, it's been really a gift for him to reveal and discuss and write about and articulate forgiveness and love and spiritual practice and theology in a way that is digestible and inspirational. And for Jim, very similarly, his road is a little more erudite, and he's kind of this reminder of how to be thoughtful and intentional and precise. And those two images are deeply in my world, and I will consistently struggle on how to live up to those callings as much as I can. So to jump into something about masculine, to speak to the archetypal structure of the masculine in mentorship, it's not intended to be male. What I mean when I say masculine is the image that came to mind really is the forest and the path. And so if you can imagine the forest being a more feminine, wild, not curated, certainly not rational, and then the pathway being directional. There's a direction, there's a vision, there's a pathway. That is the image that I have in my mind for mentorship. It is a person, place, or thing that holds within some kind of direction or vision for you, some kind of articulation of a pathway, and it holds you to that pathway. You are mentored by somebody who is guiding you through a process and that is revealing to you unborn or unknown parts of yourself. Because one of my mentors, actually, Pittman McGee, he always says, we're in this world alone, but we can't do this world alone. So we desperately need for others to help guide us along the path. The masculine energy creates that path. And so when you're tethered to a vow, when you're tethered to a commitment, you can't wrestle around with it, which is why I do think that marriage is a masculine process. When two people are married, they take vows and commitments to each other, and there's a vision of what they're doing together. What we're not taught a lot of time in that image is that marriage can be quite overwhelming, and you might experience all kinds of feelings from love to hate. And if you stay on the path, you will experience something quite profound. And I want a note on the feminine for a second. While we're talking about the masculine here in this first month, I'm going to move over and talk about the feminine next month, because next month I'm interviewing Elise Lewinen on her best behavior, the 7 deadly sins, and the price women pay to be good. It's an incredible book. I just read it last week, and it was extremely informative. I cannot wait to talk to her, and then, of course, synthesize material. And then another interview is with Dr. Jamie Clark Souls, who's a professor of religion at SMU University here in Texas, and her book is on women in the Bible. And so next month, I'll be doing a solo episode on the feminine. So just to stir the pot a little bit, I'm going to be exploring this process as these solo episodes present themselves. Hopefully they'll stir the pot a little bit for you. I'll set it up in a kind of dialogue, and I'll look forward to engaging, and of course to read your comments below and to start to engage those. But most importantly, I'd like for you to think about mentorship in your life. This really powerful image of Athena speaking through mentor, and what that means. Because the sacred is fascinatingly, the sacred is differentiated by the profane. It's kind of that which is not in the same dimension as the profane. And really simply put, that if you take a holy space like a church or a synagogue, those are spaces that are differentiated from the areas of commerce. And it's where you go to commune with mysteries of your life. I look over and I see my altar over in the corner of my room where I sit and I do meditation. That's the space where I go to be connected with aspects of reality that are beyond kind of the typical modes of existing in my day-to-day. It is anything can become sacred or be sacred or channel the sacred. It is the gods who commune or convene with us through something as banal or mundane as a sunrise. It happens every day. The sky, it's always there. Or a beloved person. The sacred and the gods can reveal themselves through those images. So again, in final reflection, what is seeking to be born through you? What are you noticing where you're enthusiasm or your interests draw you. I mean, most of the time in our culture, we reduce interests to material and to money. But even money is seeking to connect us with something broader than just money. So, and also the other question of how you might mirror the sacred in somebody else's life. That's a powerful question. Whose journey are you reflecting and are you walking with? So for now, I'll close off today with those questions and a great deal of gratitude. Thank you for being here, and thank you for joining in. Thanks for allowing me to flail around and struggle and open this to you, this new community, this new process. Check out the website, drjohnwprice.com, and sign up on the newsletter, and I'll start building some community and really strengthening this process and figuring out, once I take a leap and release the episode, figuring out what this really is going to look like. I urge you all to, if you have something you dream of doing, just get started.
Persuade your thoughts.